Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Michael Waksher. I am a district level delegate to the DNC. And I'm a Bernie delegate. I'm a Bernie delegate. What do you know? I started volunteering about a year ago, just a little more than a year ago. I saw Bernie speak at a local synagogue, and then I volunteered. I volunteered at LA Valley College in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, and then I became a delegate. And then they said, you're a comedian, you know something about social media, why don't you join the social media team? And now I'm here, with decent lighting and posters framing me, and it's wonderful. I was thinking of putting Bernie up here, but it's like, well, it's a little beyond Bernie. It's Beyond Bernie, building Beyond Bernie, the People's Assembly. We had these fantastic shirts made just for the occasion. We just made them right now, guys. Look at that. Look at this excellent t-shirt. They could be yours, they could be mine, they could be all of ours. Guys, we've got prison reform and abolition coming up at 3, well, it's a little past 3:30, but soon. I'm just buying them time for the wonderful transition. We've got US foreign policy and demilitarization at 5. We've got the Green New Deal at 7. I don't know about you, I'm for all of these things. I just wanted to let you know that while we're transitioning, that we do have Bernie Sanders. Oh, Bernie Sanders made it, he made it. Look at him. Oh no, Bernie is trapped. He's trapped by the establishment of the Democratic Party. Oh no, Bernie, no, we've got to get you out. We've got to get you out, Bernie. It was always not me, us, folks. It was always not me, us. Let's free Bernie. Let's free the Bern, because it's on us now, guys. It is on us. It is not me, us. Come on, Bernie, you can get out of there. It is on us to carry on the legacy of Bernie Sanders and social democracy and all that good stuff. Guys, I was just, making a little bit of money on set for a film, and the premise of that film was a priest that turns into a vampire and starts feeding on youth that have been abandoned by society. And I was working on set with that, and I just really felt like I was right there at the DNC. I really felt I was there, and I didn't feel like I missed it due to COVID at all. But let's see, guys. I want to give a shout out to us. Because I want you all to follow us right here. Oh, look at that, California delegates. Yes, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter. You can do all of these things. Promotion. Guys, we got to promote our message. If we don't promote ourselves, then it won't get out there. So be sure to promote all of our messages. I want to give a song, a quick song before we transition to Ro Khanna, who, like me, voted no on the Democratic Party platform because it does not include Medicare for all, which we so desperately need in this pandemic, and just as a matter of human rights, of course. Row, row, row your vote fiercely up the stream. Verily, 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 life is but a constant struggle against the forces that oppress us and the corporatocracy, and against the billionaire class, and against the 1% and the politicians that they buy. It is a constant struggle. Politics goes on forever. Guys, it goes on forever. I'm so happy you're here with us at the People's Assembly, building Beyond Bernie. So, unless you need me to buy more time for you, I would like to now throw my energy to the panel on prison reform and abolition. Lauren, if you would like to take it from here, or tell me to do more time, which I will gladly do. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you.
Do more time. That was very on topic for our next panel.
Oh my
God.
Lauren,
Andy, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Okay, take it away.
Did you want anyone to introduce the speakers in general?
Well, I'm going to let each speaker introduce themselves with about 3 to 5 minutes of what their background is regarding the issue of prisons and prison reform. How did they come to their opinions about prisons? What was their involvement in this system? And I'd like to actually start with Tasha Williams, if she's there. She's the one who led a demonstration yesterday.
Yes, I'm here.
Would you like to start out, Tasha?
Yes. So hello, everybody. My name is Tasha Williams, and I'm the founder of We Bring Change. I started it just a few weeks ago after the July 20th raid on Black prisoners at Soledad State Prison. My husband, Talib Williams, is a prisoner at that location. He has been in prison for 18 years and he is 35 years old. We decided that, you know, after the raid, which took place against peaceful Black inmates who had no violent write-ups for 15 to 25 plus years. They are targeted for STG activity, which is security threat group, meaning prison gangs or street gangs. And it's completely fabricated. The alleged evidence that they have against my husband is quotes from George Jackson, which he used on a book that he wrote about the history of Soledad. My husband's book was also taken, as well as other literary works by revolutionaries or about revolutionaries. After that, we decided, you know, we have to be as loud as we possibly can, because not only were these men extracted from their cells and you know, put in very close quarters with no masks and half naked for 6 hours. But the prison saw its first cases of COVID just 2 weeks after that raid. So, you know, they're basically attempting to murder peaceful Black revolutionaries inside Soledad State Prison with the racial targeting that has led to now 19 prisoners testing positive for COVID. So that's why I'm here. I'm very new in the game, but I'm here to make some noise and raise some hell.
Okay, Bernie Gomez, who I just recently discharged parole. Would you like to talk about your background and with the prison system?
Yes, so greetings everybody. You know, I want to take this time, as it is my custom, you know, taught to me by my elders and the ancestors, right, to, you know, to acknowledge, you know, the original inhabitants of this land, you know, the lonely people. Also, you know, giving you know, acknowledgements and you know, greetings to the, you know, the four directions, you know, the elements of power, life, you know. So with that being said, you know, my name is Bernie Gomez. I am the, you know, Programs and Leadership Assistant at MILPA, which is a Motivating Individual Leadership for Public Advancement. I was born and raised in Watsonville, you know, California. At a young age, you know, experienced, you know, school to prison, the school to prison pipeline, you know, school push out, you know, just all those, you know, went through all the structural inequities that, you know, that are there. I've been incarcerated since, you know, give or take 2004, in and out, you know, experiencing, you know, recidivism at a high rate, wondering why this is going on, you know, wondering why I can't get out of this system. Until recently, I've discharged parole in June, as a matter of fact, a couple of months ago, you know, and I'm here to, like, you know, provide, you know, former incarceration representation, you know, try to do my best to, you know, bring light, you know, my experience. We believe, you know, those closest to the problem are closer to the solution. And MILPA has provided a platform for myself to, you know, to wear my trespasses, you know, responsibly, and, you know, provide, you know, my story and provide, you know, just our point of view, you know, the formerly incarcerated point of view, you know, like my experiences, you know, I'm sure relate to many of those brothers and sisters that are locked up right now and that are, you know, that just on the process of getting out or been out and still struggling. You know, there's so many, you know, structural systems and policies and procedures in place to, like, to ensure that we fail, you know, and we gotta, you know, continue this fight, you know, and yeah, I'll say that much. Thank you.
Okay, Dorsey, and I've known Dorsey for about 25 years. He's the Executive Director of Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, organization also called All of Us or None. So Dorsey, why don't you explain your connection to the system and what your organization is about? You there, Dorsey? Dorsey, paging Dorsey, you there?
Hey, how about now? Can you hear me?
Okay, there you are. Yeah.
You know, my initial connection to the system was probably being arrested at a very young age when we moved down to Menlo Park in East Palo Alto in a predominantly white area. And before people decide to exercise white flight, I think they started exercising the zero tolerance for Black people. So I got arrested probably at an early age for retrieving the ball out of a neighbor's yard. Ultimately, at the age of 19, I was convicted of first-degree murder and sent to San Quentin Prison. I sent to prison where I served most of my time at San Quentin. And I got out in October 1981, and I walked 100 yards and got a job at the prison law office because the conditions inside the institution was so horrendous that it was something that I didn't think I could simply walk away from. So probably from 1972 to what I currently do, I've been engaged at fighting the prison industrial complex. And before y'all start calling it the prison industrial complex, me and Angela Davis and a group of people took an obscure term out of a Mike Davis book and taught you how to say the prison industrial complex. I started attending international conferences like the International Conference on Penal Abolition. And I think the first one I went to was in New Zealand. The second one was in Canada. And I've been to prisons probably all around the world, examining the incarceration of human beings. In addition to that, I also linked with Eddie Ellis, Divine Pryor, and a number of other formerly incarcerated people. And what we did was introduce another term into public speak. That term was the formerly incarcerated person. And the emphasis was on the concept of person. So when I hear people refer to themselves as an incarcerated person or incarcerated people, I recognize that we didn't introduce a lot of stuff into public speak that actually then walked. Some of my work also included managing campaigns that was national around the concept of employment issues. And what we pushed out was Ban the Box, where we pushed up against government to remove the question off of applications that asked the question, have you been convicted of a felony? Currently, I sit in the position of Executive Director of Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, which is an odd thing to be first incarcerated for murder. Then the second thing, second part of my life, I'm the Executive Director of a law office. In addition to that, at Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, I have a staff of approximately 27 people or thereabouts. Half of my staff is formerly incarcerated, and half of my staff that serve a significant amount of time in prisons one way or the other. So generally, I'm not hiring people who did a few years in jail. Generally, I'm hiring people who did 20, 30, 35 years, 15 years, because I figure like they need to have a voice in these particular affairs. In addition to that, part of a group called the Formerly Incarcerated and Convicted People and Family Movement. And probably in 2018, what we were known for is that we took 1,000 formerly incarcerated people from around the United States and went into Florida. And what we did when we went into Florida, we campaigned for Amendment 4. Within a 2.5-hour period, we knocked on 1,800 doors. We emailed 10,000 people, and we text messaged 70,000. So what am I doing in this fight right now is that I'm trying to get the right to vote for 50,000 people in California that's currently on parole, because I actually do think that when people are coming home from prison, I got a guy that works in my office that turned 50 years old on August the 5th, and he's 50 years old, and he's never been eligible to vote. I got a friend named Catfish that had cast his first vote at the age of 69. So at a certain point, what I think that I'm doing is fighting the vestiges of slavery in a real serious way, because I can see people pulling down statues and upset about the statues, but they seem not to actually look at the state constitution of where they live and see what we got embedded in the Constitution, like terms like involuntary servitude and slavery, which is the way that they implement the practice of current slavery, and do not find it objectionable, but they would find the statues and the symbols objectionable, but not necessarily the practice. So I've been at this probably off and on since I stepped in prison in February of 1972 to the date. So I think I've been at this thing for about 50 years.
Well, thank you, Dorsey. Let me do my introduction, then we're going to come back around and talk about that issue of whether the system needs to be reformed or abolished and what that exactly means. So I don't have any experience either directly with a relative incarcerated or being incarcerated myself, except for my step-grandfather, who served 3 months at Rikers Island as a numbers runner. I worked at Soledad Prison starting in 1984. I was hired as the youngest teacher they ever hired there, 27 years old. And having been in Santa Cruz, which was a very white campus at the time with a scattering of Asians, and then going into CTF Soledad Prison, and virtually everybody was black and brown. I met the first big groups of Native Americans I'd ever met. And it became immediately obvious to me that California was an apartheid state. And I began to raise issues about what we were doing in the prison. And people said, you better become a union steward very quickly, because with your big mouth, you're gonna get fired really quickly. And within the first year, just as I passed probation, I became a union steward. And ultimately, I ended up being the chair of the bargaining team that represented all teachers in all state agencies, prisons, youth authority, mental institutions for SEIU, Local 1000, and moved our union into the realm of prison reform issues. In 1989, I worked on a curriculum because California had once been kind of a leader in progressive prison systems. People came from all over the world to look at California when Earl Warren was director. And for decade after decade, our prison population did not grow, even as our population in prisons grew. So if you go and see Michael Moore's film about the Norwegian prisons, they got their ideas of how to run a decent prison system from California. But California gave up on those ideas. And by 1974, a guy named Robert Martinson who had worked for the prison system, wrote a paper where he basically said nothing works as far as rehabilitation goes. And California's prisons basically abandoned even the idea of rehabilitation. And by 1989, we had a brief moment after a long period of time of turning our backs on programs. The Prison Guards Union had emerged as a powerful force in the state. And in 1989, for a brief moment, we had a director who wanted to try to keep people out of prison, wanted to try to help people transition. And it was actually under a Republican governor, under George Duke Majan, where we had the best director in decades. But he was rewarded for his commitment to try to do the right thing by being fired by Pete Wilson when he was elected, and the Prison Guards Union insisted upon his being fired. And so with those, I was involved, as I said, in a curriculum project where when we tested this curriculum, a random test, we found that we could keep virtually everybody out of prison. Not any select group at all, just helping them prepare for the rough world that they were gonna transition to, not getting them any additional support, but at least getting them to understand what they were going back into and figure out how to stitch together the meager resources that are there in the community. People like Dr. John Irwin helped advise on that, Dr. Arthur Pearl. And after that project proved that you could keep virtually everybody out of prison, the response to the prison system was to discontinue the project, to do away with it, And then we realized that essentially the wardens, the CCPOA saw those kinds of programs, those kinds of reforms as a threat. And I spent the next few years trying to take prison education programs out from underneath the wardens with some legislation to create a statewide correctional school district, and was able to get it through the legislature 4 times, but each time the governors vetoed it. So even though 27 other states had proven you could run better programs if you took the programs away from the wardens. So I'm very skeptical about California's potential for reforming the prison system after spending 20 years of my life working in the system and, you know, and knowing that there was not a thing wrong with the vast majority of the folks that were there, that the vast majority of the folks could do just fine transitioning into communities with or without help if we just didn't stop getting in their way. And if we actually helped them, they could be real, you know, they could be tremendous assets to their communities. And so it's clear to me that the system has no interest in that, and that the leadership of our state has little interest in that. And so now I guess that's the transition to the issue. We go right around the circle about, does this system, can this system be reformed? What kind of reform should happen, or does it need to be abolished? And what does that mean? And what do we do to replace it? And we'll start up at the top with Tasha again. Tasha?
Okay, yeah, I'm here. So it has to be completely abolished. We need to clearly, you know, address the whole reason that prisons exist and police forces exist, and that was to capture runaway slaves and take them back to their owners. And of course, obviously, rehabilitation needs to be the #1 focus. And any rehabilitation that is taking place inside prison walls is solely in the hands of the prisoners. Prison actually sets a person up for a life of crime and recidivism. And even when you overcome the obstacles of prison politics and prison culture, you're then targeted by guards who, like my husband, because he is a revolutionary thinker, he is actually, they're trying to pin him as the Minister of Education for the Black guerrilla family, with absolutely no evidence. So they're actively trying to ruin the future that he has set up for himself in the past 18 years. And they're trying to ensure that when he does go to the board, that he is not released. So giving these people less money is just making sure they can do a little less harm. They're still evil. They need to be stopped, and the entire complex needs to be scrapped and restarted in a completely different way, to be clear.
Okay, Bernie.
Yes. So, you know, prison reform, right? We've seen reform, you know, the AB 109 realignment, Prop 47, 57, you know, and the common denominator with reform is that it'll shift the responsibility to local governments, right? You know, if we're decompressing the prison population, well, we're going back to the county. That doesn't mean I'm free. That means that I'm still behind a cell. I'm still doing time. You know, that means that there's more money being funneled back into the system. You know, reform, I believe, needs to be done at the decision table, at the places where decisions, power, money are being talked about. You know, that's the reform that we need. That's the reform. If we want to see change, you know, prison, systemic, you know, community change, we need to take that power. You know, they're not just gonna give up the power and be like, okay, you know, we'll let you, you know, go ahead and make this new, policies and whatever we want. They think of us as a number, a paycheck. That's their livelihood. We're going up against 500 years of colonization. We're going up against 200 plus years of like legal systemic racism and violence. So reform is part of abolition, because at the end of the day, also, we must also take care of our brothers and sisters behind the bars, with proper health care, at least, proper education. And I mean, yeah, it's like, this is such a, how can I say it? It's such a, like a long shot, right? To see, we think it's such a long shot to see. That's why we like personally, and at MILPA, we focus on the next 7 generations. We focus on incubating next generation infrastructure and leadership, so that by then, when they're growing up, we're able to provide them with a healthy transition to adulthood, where and just being able to be, find a better pathway towards success, because we all know the school to prison pipeline, it's embedded in the society, our societal fabric, right? So I'll say that much.
Okay, Dorsey, what do you think about reform versus abolition, and what does it mean, when we talk about reform, or what reforms might be meaningful, and what do we mean when we say abolition, in your view?
Probably the first thing I need to say is I'm going to take every inch of ground that I can take, whether it be through reform or whether it be through revolutionary action. And I've been at this for an extremely long time. When I was younger, I thought that it was just going to flip and the system was going to collapse. But after all this time, I think that I'm going to probably eat this apple one bite at a time. And I do think that we should have the aspiration of doing abolishing the prison system. I think that we'd have failed miserably if we had talked about reforming slavery. And I happen to think that the first prison systems was probably the plantation and the reservation, the first 2. So like I don't necessarily think that you can take a half-hearted approach about what we're doing, but it does not necessarily mean that you shouldn't take the smaller victories along the way. It's like, even when I'm fighting for Proposition 17 right now, I know that if I'm still alive in another 2 years, I will be trying to abolish involuntary servitude in the California Constitution. I will be part of a group of people that will be trying to abolish slavery through the 13th Amendment in the United States Constitution. So like, me being an abolitionist, if I'm traveling all around the world, like places like New Zealand, El Salvador, Cuba, and all the rest of the places, looking for an answer, those was a search for how do I go about executing abolition. And I can remember reading George Jackson's book in 1972, when it was written in longhand, when it was outlawed, and they was locking my homies up probably in 73, 74, and 75. It's sad to hear that they still slamming them down because they want to read George, and I know this is in the middle of Black August, and I know they're going to be celebrating on August the 21st, so for me, it's abolition, and in fact, right after they executed George on August the 21st, I think probably a week later, they was in the middle of Attica all the way across the country, and they were making demands that they be respected and treated like human beings. And they was being demanding to be free. So like at a certain point, do I believe in abolition? Absolutely. Do I think that it's going to collapse the system? The system is going to collapse all immediately? No. We got to fight every day of the week to get what we want. even if it's the small incremental things, like they don't necessarily try juveniles as an adult, like they actually give some conditions in prison that allow people to survive. Those things still need to be fought for until we can get to the ultimate goal of abolition. At one point, I thought anything that you did incrementally would slow the process of abolition. And I don't believe that at the back end of it, because some of those things we did enabled the people to survive while they were incarcerated, enabled people to survive when they were getting out of prison. So like, I don't necessarily think just because we banned the box that somehow we're gonna get jobs. What we got to ban is white supremacy. And we got to ban that probably at every step of the way. And we may can get around to banning the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration. But one of the things that we clearly got to ban is the philosophy that people are embracing, that allow them to do the dirty deeds that they do on a daily basis, on an incremental level and on a larger levels. But I don't want to take up a whole bunch of time preaching to you.
Okay, Dorsey, I tend to agree with you. You know, I was a union negotiator, and never did I get the contract I thought the people that I was representing deserved. Never. But every time I tried to bring home something to make their lives better. And the same way I thought about it when I was a teacher in the prison system, if I could find ways that they could hire better people, if I could find ways that the classroom would work better for my students, then that was a good thing. If I could find ways that it connected to teaching stuff that would help them when they got out the door, I would look for those things. You always try to figure out in any human system how to make something better. Now there's obvious reforms. You know, I was involved in the Prop 36 initiative. They were having trouble assembling a coalition, and I had assembled coalitions of church, labor, and civil rights groups. That was the prop that sent people to drug treatment instead of prison. And I got most of those groups on board. And yeah, it's the right thing not to send people who just have a drug problem into the prison system. That doesn't mean that the prison system goes away, and it doesn't mean that they might later end up in that system. But it was worth diverting as many as you could away from it. And I think, you know, me and you have talked about the whole issue of voting inside the prison. And, you know, a lot of people think that it's an automatic thing that you should, you know, you don't get a vote inside prison. But the truth is that 2 states in the United States never take away people's right to vote. You know, I think it's Maine and Vermont, and most other countries don't take away people's right to vote. So that kind of reform would enable more prisoners to have a right to vote and probably engage them more in the kind of politics that would help us make more reforms. Because if they were engaged, they would probably be talking to their families about having to be engaged. You want to try to create snowballs when you make change. You know, change requires momentum. And so victories, labor unions always knew this. You win a few victories and you hope that people get encouraged to fight for new things. But in terms of abolition, my assessment after being in that system for 20 years is that the prison system creates more crime than it does away with. So anything that does more harm than good should be abolished. So the system as it is, in my view, creates more harm than good. So we have to find something else, you know, better than this to deal with crime and punishment, to deal with whatever, because there are issues of crime, and maybe that's what we need to think about. You know, if this system doesn't work, and I think it doesn't, and I think most people know it doesn't work. I think almost all inmates know it doesn't work. I think most prison guards know it doesn't work for the society, but it works for their paycheck and for their job security. And I think most politicians, frankly, know it doesn't work also. So we're all kind of in this denial place where we're pretending it's both just and that it works, but it doesn't. So the next question would be, what does criminal justice look like? You know, if we get a chance, you know, what should we do about crime? Tasha?
It sounded like somebody wanted to say something.
Is there somebody in there who's trying to jump in?
Hey, Andy, I don't mind jumping in. The first thing I probably need to say is that I never was an inmate. I was always a human being. So probably the language that we
Sure.
address the problem with, unless we start actually tackling the conversation in a real systematic way, we won't equip ourselves with the language to actually get us the victory that I think that we all desiring to have, you know. And Tasha, if you look at my shirt, probably at the Soledad rally, you will see my people there. They were at San Quentin, they were at Vacaville, they were at Solano, they were in Sacramento, because I'm actually still on the ground doing organizing and pushing my team out to go that way. And what do I think it looks like? The other thing that I need to state just categorically, you can't lock up 2 million people without locking up genius and brilliance. We don't have the ability to have human beings that we just can carelessly throw away as if we don't need them. And the other reality that I think that it looks like I'm grateful for all the brothers that preceded me in this mix that taught me how to read when I was a prisoner, right? And some of those people, as a result of teaching me how to read, teaching me how to organize, will never see the light of day unless we do something different with this system. Because some of the people that I was locked up with in 1972 haven't broke freedom yet. You know, and the name of the place that I built in Oakland is called the Freedom and Movement Center. The drug program that I helped build in East Palo Alto is called Free at Last. So you ask me, how does it look? It looks like we're gonna continue to demand treatment instead of incarceration. How does it look? We're gonna continue to demand education instead of incarceration. How does it look? It looks like we should have not a social opinion, but a right to vote and a right to have input. Not just because somebody think that it's a kind thing to do for me, but think that it's a kind thing to do for yourself. Because, you know, if I got the right to vote, I got the right to vote, and I have never cast one of those things independent of thinking about my homies who couldn't vote in a prison. I have never did that thinking about I should cast this vote independent of the immigrants that don't have the right to vote. You know, so it's not a kind thing that we do for me. It's a just thing that we do for society overall. And I actually do think that we didn't have some of these other incremental victories, like the right for formerly incarcerated people to sit on the jury. That thing came up, I think, in last year's piece in California. I think that we should have a right to sit on the jury. I think that we should have a right to vote for who's a district attorney. I think that we should have a reasonable bail. And by the way, the formerly incarcerated and convicted people's movement, with the help of Michael Jordan, is going to put $500,000 into Florida so we continue to pay these asshole poll taxes so our people can vote. So what are you doing around the question of, in the event that they say that they need a poll tax, or are you going to chip in any money to make sure our folks that then fought for the right to vote can still have the right to cast it because they're actually holding them out? So what does it look like? We should stop charging people poll taxes, especially those in Florida that actually got more votes in the Florida election than any other part of the election. When it comes down to formerly incarcerated people, they actually executed Amendment 2 in Louisiana, which actually meant that they actually fought and actually secured the right for a unanimous jury panel, because it used to only take 10 people to find you guilty in Louisiana, and Norris Henderson and his crew called Vote actually fought for that stuff. So at some point, some of my homies that's locked up in these cages, they could be the sleeping beast that is actually moving stuff. And when you think about what we did in Florida, people don't think that we have the intellectual capacity. We was trying to win the South, and we thought if we won Florida, we would shake the politics of the entire nation. So what should it look like? It should look like that we actively engaged at every turn. But anyway, I'm old and I'm short-winded, but I'm long-spirited though.
Well, I apologize for the use of the word inmate, because, you know, we used to have those discussions in my classroom all the time. Those who insisted on being called convicts, those who insisted on calling prisoners. And I'm all for folks defining their own word that they prefer to go by. And there's no doubt about the issue of prisoner, you know? You're either in prison or you're not in prison. Of course, I had a conversation with Bernie and with you where you suggested some of these alternatives to prisons are continuation of imprisonment on the street. That even if when they release people with monitoring and other things, it's still imprisonment if they're watching your every move and controlling you. But Tasha, did you want to jump in there?
Muted myself. So yeah.
In other words, what do we do with the issue of crime and punishment and safety in communities? Because it's clear that communities are concerned about it. And I certainly knew guys in the prison who would tell me, point to some folks and say, you don't want that guy in your neighborhood. And sometimes they were right, you know? Right,
yeah. I mean, yeah, I think we all have, you know, cases that we've heard of in the past that scare the hell out of us. But I think those cases are used a lot to try to scare people into fearing that, you know, the guy that was arrested for an ounce of marijuana and given a life sentence is a danger to your children and to you. So I think like the first thing that could be done to, you know, make change is to take these men's fate and their rehabilitation out of the hands of uneducated prison guards. I mean, let's face it, you don't become a prison guard because you're a genius. So we need more mental health experts in prisons. We need more educated people, period, in, you know, in the, as ranking officials in the prison. We need more Black guards. We need more Black officials also. I think this is going to take about 5 million plus little changes, as Dorsey was talking about. But, you know, these are the few that, you know, I can think of right off the top of my head that would make a huge change in the prison that my husband is housed in, or held, I should say.
Thank you. Bernie, you want to, what your sense is of what should we be doing? You know, what's your vision?
Okay, so, you know, I'm hearing all this, you know, we should change, you know, prison, abolish prison. We should create, you know, fund services, but none of that's still targeting the root cause or causes of our affliction. You know, we have post-traumatic stress disorder. We suffer from intergenerational trauma, state-sanctioned violence, white supremacy. You know, we need to heal. You know, we need to do some soul work. We need to, you know, create places where our brothers and sisters who are, you know, who are suffering, their families as well, the community, to come and unpack all this trauma, unpack, you know, their, how they, you know, how they grew up, what violence did they see or cause, you know, what was the culture at home, you know, what was, you know, what was their ability to navigate their community, their upbringing, you know. There's a root causes, you know, each one of these afflictions has a root cause, right? And if we're not able to, you know, to charge those, you know, to, you know, tackle them and really grab them and really go into, you know, what it is to identify pre-colonial times, right? That's our true identity. You know, a lot of us are suffering from assimilation. You know, we don't know who we are in reality. You know, it's like, how can we navigate this system, you know, with an education meant, you know, for white folks, basically. You know, I'm talking about personal experience. You know, when I was in school, I couldn't really relate to a lot of this stuff that was going on. So better education, right? We can create better, you know, continue to fund our education system, you know, remove the property tax, you know, that allows, you know, like resources to go into these schools, create wellness centers, culturally relevant and healing informed centers, right? You know, I don't need someone to tell me what's wrong with me. You know, I don't need a trauma informed approach. I need a healing informed approach. I need someone to tell me what's right with me. And that's one of the fundamental pillars to having our young folks and you know, people of color, you know, stay away from this prison system. You know, what's the best way to like end mass incarceration or abolish these prisons is to have folks stop going to prison. You know, so that's why, you know, it's very, you know, it's one of my beliefs that incubating next generation leadership, you know, through, you know, healthy rites of passages, you know, healthy mentoring, you know, but how can we provide that if we ourselves are not having healed? So I'm hearing a lot of like, you know, good solutions, but there's no really, we're not targeting the root causes. And as long as we just focus on the outer shell, that inner root, right, is still gonna be there, and it's still gonna affect our outcome. And I believe, you know, that if I can heal and take that process, I can teach my next brother or sister that is locked up, that coming out of that institution, you know, and provide that guidance for them. You know, it's a community. You know, it's we gotta stay together, come together, and know that, you know, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You know,
Well,
Hey, Andy,
let me give it a shot. Yeah.
you know, like one of the things that cause like I don't want to lose focus, because if here's a concept. Suppose I'm rehabilitated and the rest of society is not.
Yeah. Well, I
You know, because at a certain point, you know, if I take on the responsibility that the flaws in which they execute racism and supremacy is contingent upon something that I did falling short on, we may not ever get to addressing the collateral consequence of the practice of supremacy.
Well, let me jump on that a little bit. Can I, Dorsey? You know, John Irwin, when I worked with him back in '89, you know, when we're talking about people transitioning back into the community, integrating back into the community, John Irwin turned to me and said, Andy, there is no community. He said, you're asking people to try to integrate into the most alienated society the world has ever known, where there's so little connection, where communities are so disintegrated, where they've been so beaten down, and the things that hold things together are so falling apart. He says they're gonna have to invent community where there is none. They're gonna have to figure out how to stitch together and create their own institutions like you have, because they're not there for them to hook into, or they're few and scattered and difficult to find. And so the point of, you know, the society itself has committed a crime, you know, through our history, what we've created out there. But still, given that, some of the most successful programs ever, you know, the one that John Irwin modeled a lot of his stuff from, Art Pearl's stuff for the New Careers for the Poor back in the 1960s, ex-offenders went out and did the work in the communities. The college programs that were out there, they set up the programs because they knew better what was missing in those communities. And that's a big part of why those programs got discontinued, is because they were good at creating elements of community. But you know, when I think about the system, I ask myself, the first way you bring it down is to, if you want to have less crime, you define less things as crimes. You know, there are too many things that are defined as crimes that are suitable for incarceration that should never have been suitable for that. So a large percentage of the people should never have been sent into any kind of system at all, you know, because what they were doing didn't victimize anybody, you know, or minor victimization, which could easily have been, you know, restored, if you will. And it wasn't any crime against the community or the state. So you bring as few people into a system as possible, because it's just like bringing people into the hospital right now with COVID. If you put a lot of people in a place where there's a lot of bad stuff happening, a lot of people are going to be badly affected by that system. Not everybody comes out being like you, wanting to do good after that. A lot of folks come out dispirited, you know, and angry and ready to lash out because they've seen things that people shouldn't see and been treated in ways that people shouldn't be treated. So, you know, it definitely has to be built down dramatically as to how many people go into this system. And as Bernie said, a big part of it is the school system, because when I was on the school board, I watched how they were expelling and suspending people for nothing, which then got them into a cycle where they were unlikely to graduate and end up in, you know, and then they got in trouble. So, you know, you have to look at the that build into it, and the school system is equally culpable in terms of creating this mess. You wanna jump on that at all, Dorsey? I probably took some of your focus away.
Yeah, I'd like to jump on that. You know, and I like to go back to, you know, who taught me how to read when I was in prison. Who taught me how to read when I was in prison was probably members of the Black Liberation Army and the Black Panther Party. We had political education courses, and they introduced me to everything from Socrates, Aristotle, Ralph Ellison, Cornforth, and everything else. But they introduced me to a vision that when I got out, I had an obligation not to only help myself, but to help my community, because my community was ailing, because they was taking so many of us off of the streets. So it's like, you know, and you know, and when I'm saying that I'm all the way down, some people say pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And the only thing I can tell you, at times I didn't have any boots, and I was 10 toes down without boots, you know, because at a certain point, you know, I can tell you, I love the hell out of smoking weed. I really love smoking weed. And then on August the 20th, almost 30 years ago, I sit down and thought that I was wasting my life because I left so many of my comrades behind. That one thing that I gave up is I gave up drinking alcohol, smoking weed, and going to nightclubs, because I thought that the fight that I'll be engaged in deserved my serious attention as opposed to it being a hobby. You know, because at a certain point, what are you committed to doing? The second point that I'd like to make is that when I says at a certain point, I can get into, well, I needed to heal myself, right? When we built Free at Last, which was a community recovery and rehabilitation center, what we was arguing for was doing a different version of interdiction, because what we wanted to do was help our homies who was hooked on crack, because we figured like if we didn't help them, the rest of the community would sacrifice them to prison sentences and jails. The other part of the thing that was wrong with the Proposition 36 that you mentioned is that it bought into a narrative of the deserving versus the undeserving. You know, and when we get into that narrative of the deserving versus the undeserving, based on what I'm convicted of, which was first-degree murder, nobody ever would have ever thought that I was deserving of freedom. They would have never thought that I shouldn't be punished. They would have thought that anything except for taking me to the town square and lynching me was an okay thing to do. But then they won't necessarily admit that me and my homeboys who went to prison when East Palo Alto was named the murder capital of the United States changed the political landscape and took that off the board, because some of the people who doors that we knocked on wasn't really doors. We started going into the institution, telling our other homies who had controls of certain parts of our neighborhood is that they were doing harm, and convinced them to do something different. that was something that the police couldn't do for us. That was something that we had to take responsibility for, to do for ourselves. So at a certain point, not only can the police not do it, they can only do harm. When we gathered in Sacramento on July the 1st, and they kept talking about a few bad apples, it's not a bad apple, it's a rotten ass orchard. So what we did was collected 600 pictures of police homicides that took place over the course of the last 7 years and laid them on the Capitol steps, because we getting tired of saying that it's only a few of us when we know we're the rabbits that they've been hunting, and when they catch us, they kill us on occasion. So at a certain point, it's not just George Floyd. You know, George Floyd would probably have been a looked over, but it was 50 years of arguments that people was laying out there saying that they were killing us that made George Floyd murder really, really visible, you know, because they did not do it because they had a real great conscience. If they would have had a real great conscience, hell, they would have found everybody guilty in the Rodney King beating. He was filmed, you know? So at a certain point, when we get to what do I want justice to look like? I want it to look like that my kids is entitled to go to school and have a quality education like everybody else's. What do I want justice to look like? Is that when I get sick and elderly, or my sister who's sitting on the couch at 80 years old, that she had the same degree of access to health care as anybody else. What do I want justice to look like? If you're a woman in this society, you should make the same amount of money as anybody else doing the goddamn job. What do I want justice to look like? I want justice to look like when I show up, they won't ask me about my conviction history, but ask me for my qualifications of a job. You know, what do I want justice to look like? I think that my homies, I want to see the district attorney come and talk to some formerly incarcerated people about his run for office, as opposed to sucking up to ministers in the community and giving them the shuck and the jive like they should be elected, and nobody holding them accountable for executing 3 strikes, because those decisions is made with the district attorney. You know, and in some of these instances, when I says, do we want the right to vote? I'm not saying that we can have the right to elect somebody, but for damn sure, in some of these smaller elections, there's enough of us in the city, in the county of Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in Oakland, to beat the margins, so we can make a determination what they do to us, as opposed to what they do for us. We got a chance to make a determination on that stuff. So what do I want justice to look like? I want my kids to have a better opportunity than I ever had. Because in my lifetime, if somebody would have bet the farm, they should have betted on me going to prison, because that was more accessible than Stanford University. And by the way, I read in the chat that there's killers on the streets. Everybody used to think that the community of East Menlo Park and East Palo Alto was going to be destroyed by drug dealers. They didn't nearly have as great of an impact as Facebook, that moved into our community that's a mile from my house right now, and actually changed the culture and changed what my community looked like, because my neighbors all moved to Stockton and other places because they no longer can afford to live in the houses where they were living in. So what do I want to look like? I want to look like when we get a house that we ain't gonna get ran out of our own neighborhoods when somebody else decides to come in and take that shit over.
Well, so how do we make us move? You know, my students, when I used to talk about a better world in the class, you know, first when I was a young teacher, they used to laugh at me, you know, what's this 27-year-old talking about this shit in this classroom? But, you know, there were so many things that got in the way of it, because I watched in that prison system, has, you know, the chief deputy warden explained to me that racial divisiveness was a valuable management tool, how he fanned the flames, you know, to create discord between the different groups there. And I used to always tell my students, you could take over this prison in a heartbeat. And the best way you could take it over is by doing exactly what they don't want you to do, which is, you know, come Monday morning, everybody's sitting around the table, whereas it used to be a black table, a white table, a Mexican table, another table, whatever. Every frigging table would be black, white, Mexican, other, all sitting around. And when the officer came and said, what the hell is going on here? You go, oh, hi, Officer Brown. How was your weekend? You know, we've decided we're not playing this bullshit game anymore. We're demanding some real things that we need here, the better education that we deserve, the transition that we heard. We're not going to give you any excuse for filing for overtime because you keep on stirring up conflicts over the telephones or over other resources that are going on here. I mean, there's got to be first steps. Our friend Michael Markham, when he was in the prison, created some first steps. He created Coalition, and part of the reason why we do get to vote, you know, ex-offenders, why ex-prisoners, formerly incarcerated people get to vote is because they did the lawsuit that ended that. Whereas in the southern states, a lot of them are still stuck or are just beginning to address it decades later. So there have to be first steps that empower the folks inside the prison and their families to make these changes, and then gather other allies who don't have as visceral a connection to it. What do you think? What do folks think? What are our first steps right now? Anybody want to jump in?
So, no, I don't believe there's actual first steps we should take, right? You know, this is an ongoing plight that we've been fighting for generations. You know, we've been advocating already for, you know, a better healthcare system, mental services, you know, better quality of job retention, you know, livable wages. You know, we gotta build the first steps that we need to take is rebuild the social fabric of our community. You know, build opportunities for our brothers and sisters that are locked up. You know, build those opportunities for them when they get out. You know, they're able to, you know, jump into some type of work, some type of, you know, healing, some type of reunification with their families. You know, we need to go up against, you know, these boards and city councils, right? The board of the county board of supervisors, city councils. These are some of the steps that we need to take. Is we need to take that power. You know, all this stuff that we're talking about, you know, sometimes might sound good. It might be, you know, we might be on fire, we might be passionate. But if we don't hold the power, if we don't control the money, you know, what's it, you know, what is it? You know, we're still going to be talking about the same stuff, you know, we're still going to, it's been, I was reading this thing on this conversation Angela Davis had with Dylan Rodriguez. You know, these things have been going on for generations. You know, Dorsey, you know, he's talking about, he's been, you know, he was, he learned from revolutionary, you know, statesmen, you know, that he's, you know, he grew up he learned how to read in prison, all that stuff, right? So years after years, we've been, you know, advocating for the same things, you know, for the same, for the same change, but we're not advocating for the actual power. We're not going into taking over this, not taking over, but, you know, injecting community representation into these boards, these commissions. You know, those are the steps that we need to start looking at and taking, so that we can see, you know, next systemic change, you know, for our kids, you know, if and for their kids. We might not see that change in our lifetime, you know, but at least we're incubating, you know, our next, you know, I keep saying it, incubating the next leadership, next generation leadership, you know. And this is, for me, the steps that we need to be looking at.
Anybody else?
I think there's a question. Oh, sorry. There's a question for Juan Martinez in the room. Maybe I should unmute Juan. Is that okay?
Can you unmute him, or do I have to?
I'll ask Juan, are you there? I think Juan, what
Is
happened?
Juan still there?
Juan, did you have? Okay. You got to click Juan. There you go. I think he's, are you there, Juan?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hi there. I'm Juan from Los Angeles. I organized for Bernie. I did actually during his campaign here, and I go by Joey as well for a lot of people in the area that know me. I've been listening to what's been said a lot about reforming, and I think one of the major breakthroughs that we have uncovered in studies is that poverty and homelessness are some of the issues that create environments that promote behaviors which lead to situations where people are found in scenarios where they're breaking the law or engaging with particular activities that place those people in situations that are a pipeline to prison. And what I like is that a lot of psychologists are not only promoting these programs that are helping individuals reframe their way of thinking, but that we can see directly that funding social programs and that doing more intervention programs to prevent people from going to prison is a great way to address this situation. I think that as long as we have a problem with poverty itself and that we don't fix the racism in our institution, that we aren't going to be able to completely abolish the police. But Switzerland has done a fantastic job. And if we can begin to use models from other countries that are reducing their prison and inmate population, that in itself is a great advancement. But I would say that it begins with taking those advancements first and creating social programs and alleviating poverty, and also addressing some of the cultural influences that arise from a culture that has been impacted so much by this racial and unfair system that we experience here in the United States. And yeah, no,
Well, would any of the panelists care to respond?
Hey, yeah, I'd like to respond on a couple things. Over the course of a lifetime of doing this work, there has been a transition, at least for me in my life. Now, you know, at one point I thought some other people was going to save me, and I don't necessarily feel that's the case. You know, and when I got past they weren't going to save me, I worked harder for saving myself. You know, and I started building institutions that I actually controlled, and I actually was responsible for the budget. I was actually responsible for the hiring. I was actually responsible for all those things. Now, if people who really got that reformist attitude and feel like it's just me who need reform, the first thing I ask you to do for all my homeboys coming home is give them a job, because a lot of people do this advocacy and say what they believe. But I think the social criteria, the truth is the practice. So if you're a person saying that you practice in prison reform and you don't have somebody that just got out the cage working for you, able to make a decision about that stuff, then I think that you've fallen short in terms of setting a value and an example that should be there. Then the other point, at first, I fought really hard in isolation around the question of equality. Then at a certain point, intellectually, I moved to that spot of saying not only do I want equality, I want equity, because the system has been stacked so horribly against me that I need something other than just equal stuff. The equal stuff don't mean shit to me if you already ran 50 yards ahead of me and you already used everything else. It's almost like, here's an equity question. Let's take just an example, marijuana. We just got finished legalizing marijuana. You know, you told me your dad was did a couple days in jail for number running, right? Now, we used to have a whole bunch of black people that did number running.
Yeah.
You know, so they came up with a lotto system. What happened to the black people who used to have the job being number runners? They had a career, they had a job, they had a family. What happened to them? Then we come back beyond number runnings, but prior to that, we did prohibition. You had black people that actually was great makers of cognac. What happened to them? We didn't get to distillery. Then we can get to a recreational use of marijuana. And the only thing that we can do is think about how to work for somebody else who got control of the apparatus, which means that we didn't change shit and we still only worker bees as opposed to controlling the very means of the production and the what you call. So for me, at a certain point, it was beyond when I stopped using drugs and I stopped going into recovery that I got into a deeper framework of thought about what do I want to do for my homies coming home. I want to be able to shake their hand and give them a job and give them a paycheck instead of a pay number and actually create space where they can have sanctuary when they actually think about fucking up, they can actually talk to somebody about it that ain't going to send them back to the pen. So, and by the way, Juan, I think is more than just a question of poverty. I think it's a question of structure. So as long as they can ask me if I have been convicted of a crime on a housing application, I don't have an equal chance at getting housing. So all of us anon in Oakland, we fought, they had the question removed from the application, rental applications around the question of have you been convicted of a felony. As long as they ask me about that felony in terms of an employment situation, I don't have an equal chance of getting a job. So we banned the box in employment. And in terms of education, throughout the nation, you have people banning the box on the question, have you ever been convicted of a felony on college applications? Because if we fill that out, we may not even get a chance to get to the fastest application. We may not get a chance to get to a TANF application where they take it one step further and not only ask you about your felony, they start asking you if anybody in your household have one of those. And the other part that I need to say, if we're just gonna sit down and let them put ankle monitors on anybody and everybody that they can, we're gonna be paying for our own incarceration at somebody else's living room because we generally not calling those shots of where we living. And if we got to stay at home, I know that if I stay at home 7 days a week, and if you haven't noticed it, your PG&E bill should have went up, or your electric bill should have went up while you've been suffering from COVID. If you've been suffering from this pandemic, all of that stuff went up. The water use in the house that went up. Everything that went up as a result of me working from home. You know, and if that's going to be the case, that we incarcerating people in their own living room, in their wife or their husband living room or a family member living room, then maybe we can start thinking about if we're going to do reentry as opposed to putting it into reentry housing. Why don't we actually decide to actually help a family out and help subsidize individual families to pay the rent and pay the bills? Because you know what? If we attach that money to somebody getting out of prison, then maybe when we come home, as opposed to being frightful, they'd be willing to look at us as somebody that has something to put in the pot, like maybe a chicken, you know, or something. Because the way that we're looking at reentry and the way we're looking at that stuff, we're looking at it as if we're going to be a burden to somebody else while we're spending billions of dollars on reentry and not necessarily sharing the decision making about how do we spend the money. So like if you would have let me out what I know now, you should have gave me the cost of my incarceration for 1 year. And then maybe when I got back together with my old lady, I could have walked in the house, being able to pay the PG&E bill, be able to clothe the kids, and be able to actually have space enough where I wasn't going to go back to prison immediately, because the first thing that we got to alleviate coming home from prison is the sense of desperation. So if we ain't willing to actually fight desperation, then we ain't fighting shit. We just pretending like we're doing some stuff. But once again, I'm old and I got a tendency to preach.
So
thank you. We actually, sorry, I just want to let you know that we have another panel starting at 5. So just want to check. But this is really great, really excellent, and wish we could go longer. But how do you want to do this? Like ask people for last minute remarks?
Final comments to close it up. You know, at the end of the panel? What has the panel made you think about differently, perhaps? What do you want other folks that come away from this panel? And I'll do mine real quick and give you the rest of you some more time. You know, as I said, I worked on a project in '89 to try to keep people out of prison when there was a moment when the leadership in the prison system seemed to want to do that. I didn't have the ability to change the circumstances outside the prison at all. All I could change was how the guys that were leaving thought about what was out there. And just getting them even 60 days of working with other inmates to think about how they were gonna, react to challenges and how they were gonna stitch together their resources and how they were gonna role play some of that stuff led to, when a guy evaluated that group of inmates, not one of them came back to prison over a 3-year period. That was with no additional resources except for what they could secure themselves. In the 60s, Art Pearl's program actually gave people resources. They created career ladders for people that walked out of prison, so people had a guaranteed right to walk into a job in virtually any public service career and then could work their way up with no barriers. That, I think, would be far better, giving people actual resources, similar to what Dorsey said, real money when they walk out the door and real opportunity that is open-ended, including education, free education to pursue without any barriers to any professions. But,
7 minutes left.
Okay, next. Anybody else,
Yes.
Let's get Tasha. She's been over there for a while. I've seen some chat. You want to say something, Tasha?
Oh, no, I just want to say that I'm super thankful to be here today because, obviously I've only been at this for a few weeks now. But, my main focus has been the small changes inside the prisons. So Bernard and Dorsey, listening to them was really educational, actually. They both made great points that I will take into my future as a criminal justice activist. So I'm just super thankful to be here, and I hope to get to work with you all in the future.
And Bernie, and I'm going to give Dorsey the last word since he's been preaching so well to us here today.
Yes, understanding that this is an uphill battle, this is not it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. We're going to endure this. And one thing that I ask, right, is get involved in your local region. Go to the budget hearings, right? Go to the board of supervisors, the city council members. Advocate for our people. Advocate for for those coming out. Advocate for those that are stuck in there. We will not see change if we don't approach it and we don't advocate for it and we don't fight for it. If we don't take these positions, if we don't become civically engaged, advocate for our youth, for their to provide them with better pathways for success. This is it's imperative for us to become the front line, be the vanguard for our kids, for our grandkids, for the next 7 generations. So that let's take on the brunt as our ancestors did. To provide opportunity, provide provide hope. Just with that being said, I appreciate everyone here. I hold them up.
Okay, Dorsey, you got the final word, and then we're going to sign off.
Yeah, y'all can find me at www.prisonerswithchildren.org or Dorsey at prisonerswithchildren.org. And at this point, I generally would say, give me some money so I can fight voting rights. But I actually do think that there's a more critical issue that we probably should be looking at, is how do you support people showing up at Soledad to stop them from torturing homies that's in Soledad? How do you stop them from doing the dirty deed of trying to break the backs of men because they are fearful? So, you know, if anything, if it's anything that y'all can do for me, support Tasha Williams and support those people inside of a prison that actually is being locked up because they actually are fearful for them reading books and learning how to grow. You know, support that, because if you support that, you could get somebody to get out of prison just like me. You may not agree with everything that I got to say, but at least you will get somebody strong enough to say something. You know, so support demonstrations in front of the prisons. Support people who are being punished simply because they're black and we didn't kill George Floyd and people that start getting paranoid and shit and want to pull them out their cells late at night. Go and support them and make sure that they're safe. You know, because at a certain point, what happens when you ignore the reality is that the California Department of Corrections, and I refuse to put that rehabilitation on it, because as soon as they changed their name, they sucked out all the money for rehabilitation and put more money into barbed wires and bullets. You know, support the reality that those people are being locked up, and somehow those people who are educated, that got different views, don't nearly get released as often as other people under indeterminate prison sentences. You know, so like we could have a whole body of political prisoners that nobody in the United States know their name of, just because they didn't read a book about George Jackson, or they didn't read Fanon, or they didn't got caught thinking about Malcolm too hard. You know, so support those people, because you know what? They could be your future leaders when they get out. And by the way, if nobody told you, you got a sleeping giant in your living room, and sooner or later, you're gonna have to address them anyway.
Well, thank you, Dorsey, and thank all of you for participating. I really enjoyed it, and from the comments, it looks like other people got a lot out of it too. Thanks, and have a wonderful evening.